What if I told you that some of the most heavily armed warships of the 18th century didn't belong to any king? They didn't fly the flag of England, Spain, or France. They flew the skull and crossbones, and they could blow a royal warship clean out of the water. We think of pirates as desperate men on desperate ships, leaking hulls, ragged sails, barely held together by tar and prayer. But that's not the whole story, not even close. Because some pirates didn't just steal ships, they built them into something terrifying. Here's the hook, and it's a big one. The most notorious pirate vessels of the golden age of piracy were not the rotting, barnacle-covered wrecks of legend. Some of them were better armed than the official warships hunting them. More cannons, heavier broadside, faster in certain waters, and crewed by men who had nothing to lose, which, arguably, made them more dangerous than any trained naval officer. These weren't just ships, they were floating fortresses. And today, we're going to go inside them. To understand the floating fortress, you have to understand the era it was born in. The late 1600s through the 1720s. Historians call it the golden age of piracy. The Atlantic trade routes were absolutely drowning in wealth. Spanish galleons loaded with silver from the Americas. English merchant ships fat with sugar, tobacco and rum. Dutch East Indiamen riding low in the water under the weight of spices worth more than gold. And patrolling all of it? Royal navies stretched thin across thousands of miles of open ocean. This created an opportunity, and pirates seized it, sometimes literally. The most effective way a pirate captain built his floating fortress wasn't by constructing one from scratch. He captured one. A fast, well-built merchant vessel, a frigate, a brigantine, a sloop, would be taken as a prize, gutted of its cargo, and then rebuilt for war. Gun ports were cut into the hull. Extra cannons were mounted, sometimes dozens more than the ship was originally designed to carry. The rigging was modified for speed. Storage was stripped to make room for powder and shot. Within weeks, a merchant ship could be transformed into something the merchant's owners would never recognize. Something that could make a naval captain nervous. So what exactly made these ships so formidable? Let's get into the details, because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. First, the cannons. A standard merchant ship of the early 1700s might carry 8 to 12 guns. Enough to discourage a small attacker, not enough to win a real fight. A pirate who captured and modified that ship might push it to 30, 40, even 50 guns. Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge carried 40 cannons. That matched or exceeded many fourth-rate warships in the Royal Navy. Second, the crew. A naval warship had a defined crew ratio. Pirates didn't play by those rules. They packed their ships with men, far more than naval doctrine recommended. Why? Because in a boarding action, sheer numbers of screaming, armed, desperate men on your deck was a weapon in itself. Terror was a tool, and they used it masterfully. Third, the speed. The pirate ships that survived longest were often not the biggest, they were the fastest. Shallow draft sloops and schooners could sail in waters where a deep-hulled naval frigate couldn't follow. They could outrun pursuit in open water, then vanish into island shallows where no one could chase them. The combination of firepower and speed made them uniquely dangerous. And fourth, the psychology. When a pirate ship flew its colors, ran out its guns, and pulled alongside your vessel, most captains surrendered immediately. Why? Because fighting meant damage, casualties, and possible death. Surrendering meant you'd probably live. Pirates relied on this reputation. A fortress doesn't just win fights, it prevents them. Let's talk about some real ships, because this is where history gets extraordinary. The Queen Anne's Revenge. Originally a French slave ship called La Concorde, she was seized by Edward Teach, Blackbeard, in 1717. He immediately went to work on her. He added guns, stripped her out, and turned her into his flagship. At 40 cannons, she was a genuine warship. When Blackbeard blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina, in 1718, blockaded an entire colonial port, he did it with this ship and a small fleet. One pirate, one harbour, brought to its knees. The Royal Fortune. Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, was perhaps the most successful pirate in history. He captured over 400 vessels. His flagship, the Royal Fortune, carried 40 to 52 guns, depending on the configuration. He flew elaborate flags, dressed in fine clothes, and commanded his floating fortress with terrifying efficiency. When 2 Royal Navy warships finally caught him in 1722, it took both of them, and even then, the fight wasn't easy.
The Widder. Originally a slave ship as well, a grim but common origin for pirate flagships. Samuel Bellamy seized her in 1717. He converted her into a warship carrying 28 cannons and a crew of over 150 men. She was fast, she was armed, and she was, briefly, one of the most feared ships on the Atlantic. She sank in a storm off Cape Cod later that same year, and her wreck, discovered in 1984, is the only fully authenticated pirate shipwreck ever recovered. The cannons are still there. These weren't accidents of history. They were engineered outcomes, the result of deliberate, skilled modification by men who understood ships as weapons. Here's what doesn't get talked about enough. Why did it take so long to bring these floating fortresses down? The Royal Navy was the most powerful maritime force on Earth, and yet pirates operated openly for decades. Why? Part of it was geography. The Caribbean is enormous and full of islands, coves, and shallow waters. A pirate ship that knew local waters could simply disappear. Nassau, in the Bahamas, was essentially a pirate republic for years. A port where men could resupply, recruit, repair, and plan their next operation in relative safety. Part of it was logistics. Keeping warships on station in the Caribbean was expensive. Ships rotted faster in tropical waters. Crews died of disease. The Navy was always stretched, always underfunded relative to the territory it needed to cover. And part of it, frankly, was the ships themselves. A fast pirate sloop with shallow draft could go places a heavy naval frigate simply could not. The fortress didn't need to win every battle. It just needed to avoid the ones it couldn't win. It wasn't until coordinated naval campaigns in the early 1720s, combined with the loss of safe harbours, that the Golden Age finally began to collapse. But it took real effort to bring down ships that, in some configurations, rivaled the hunters themselves. The floating fortress was many things. It was a weapon, a workspace, a home, and a statement. It said, "We are not desperate men on broken ships. We are something you should be afraid of." And for a few extraordinary decades, they were right. The golden age of piracy ended. It always had to. But the ships it produced were a genuine engineering achievement, born from ingenuity, necessity, and an absolutely ruthless understanding of how power works at sea. Next time you picture a pirate ship, don't picture the wreck of legend. Picture 40 cannons run out, black flags in the wind, a crew of men who have nothing to lose, and a captain who knows exactly how to use that. That's the floating fortress.